Hello guys and welcome back. Sorry it's been so long. Been pretty busy at work, pretty not wanting to do anything after work where I've been so busy. Um, yeah, I thought I'd get another video out. It's been over a month since I did the last video. Yeah, I thought I'd get another one out. I want to try and get back into getting more videos out more regularly. Yeah, so this one we're going to be back doing our real world application building from scratch, our streaming platform. Um, so let's get straight into it. On the last video, I spoke about how I was going to refactor and then go over some of the other bits that I've refactored. So let's go. So what I've done is I've now changed it to now be the relationship that I originally said, not the has many belongs to relationship, but many to many relationship. So let's check over what I've done. So what I did was I first initially removed the user ID field, relationship field from the events migration. Now, normally you'd obviously create a migration to update that table, but because this is not production data and we're not in a production environment where we need to make those changes, we can literally just go ahead and change the migration and then do a migrate fresh. It doesn't matter. We don't care about the data going missing. So let's check the migration. So what I did was I removed the user ID like I mentioned, and then also what I've done is I've also added an end date time, and I changed that from event start to start date time. Makes a bit more sense, a bit more clear as to what it is, because event start doesn't tell you whether it's going to be a date, whether it's going to be a time, date time, or anything like that. So I renamed it to be a bit more informative when you come to use that object. Then what I did is I went ahead and changed the way the create function works. So what I did is I've overridden the create method from the base repository. So if you remember rightly, we created our base repository create method that takes an attribute and then creates it. What we needed to do, we need to override that because we needed to do some extra steps after that creation. So I went in, I created that method. What I also did was, which I haven't gotten to yet, we can do in a minute, is the method below, but we'll talk about it in a moment. So we go ahead and create the event. Like I said, we needed to override because in our creation form we still accept a user, so we can't pass in the user attributes when we come to create because it will try and create the field that doesn't exist anymore. So hence we're overriding and create and manually specifying which fields we want to accept. Then what we've done is we go into the event. So we grab the event we just created. We use the users relationship, and then we do a synchronization. This is where the user ID comes in from this particular drop-down menu here. So what we do is we go and fetch that user ID. Now with the synchronization method, if you don't know, is it accepts an array of IDs. So what that will do, say for example, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a relationship, and you only pass it 1, 2, and 3, 4, and leave out number 5. Number 5 will be removed, and you'll only be left with 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's a good way to sync. So if you imagine, say for example, roles, you've got a user and its roles, and they've got multiple, and you want to tick a tick box for each one you want to add. So you tick the ones, add it. The ones that were left off from previously will be removed. So it's the way it synchronizes the IDs and keeps everything together that you expect a particular ID to or user to be using. That is why we're using the user ID. And then what you can do with a synchronized method is you can then pass it columns that you want to update within our table. So what I did was we went into our event user and I added a new field. So what I was thinking is when we come to create an event, we want a user to be the moderator, the person that is owning that event. So that is why I've added is moderator Boolean, and then we've got default to 0. That is why when we go into our new repository create method, there is a is moderator option, and we set that to 1 to be true. We then pretty much just return the event once we create that. We could return nothing unless we're planning on using that event. Then obviously we return the event, but I return it anyway because at some stage I may want to use it, I may not, but it doesn't really matter if we return it. It's not harming. I then created a second method, which I haven't got around to fully implementing yet, but let's give you a lowdown on what the plan is behind that. So the idea and thinking is we can manage this. Once we create this event, we're going to create and manage event section, and what we can then do is then add users to that event. So in a very similar way to how we added our moderator to that event, we're pretty much going to go the event users synchronize, and then we're just going to pass an array of IDs we want which users to be associated to that event that they can then turn up and watch. That's as simple as that. I haven't got as far as obviously creating the screen to do all that, but that is going to be the idea behind it. So if we go back to our events, we can now see that we've got our date time, and that's actually wrong. I just realized I've added it, but I didn't change that. Oh no, I did. It must just be using, oh, it just literally is using the same date time. I must have entered it the same. Let's just double check. So we go create, do test, or test one. We use google.com, it don't really matter for the time being. It goes 2 o'clock, finishes at 4 o'clock, submit. Yeah, it is working. I must have just entered 1 o'clock both times. But that's pretty much it for that. Let's go ahead and let's start looking at now creating a management screen, maybe a button here to manage an event that will take you to another screen where we can add attendees. Maybe we can use a Vue.js component to add remove users, and then we submit the form. Maybe we could do something like that. So yeah, let's get into it. I don't want to spend too long on the video because my previous video has been quite long and extensive. I'm not sure that's probably the best idea because people generally fall asleep listening to people talk. So I want to try and keep you engaged as possible. What we could actually do before we do that was write some tests to test our functionality and make sure that it's doing what we expect it to do. So I think that would be a good thing to actually learn. So Laravel out the box obviously comes with PHP unit, and if you don't know, the reason obviously you create tests is to make sure that there's sustainability in your code. So if, for example, you write a bit of code that goes hello world, but you made a typo by accident, the reason for that test is to check what you've written. So if you write in your test, it should expect hello world, and you run that test, it'll go, uh-oh, it didn't say hello world. It was meant to receive this, but got this instead, which I can show an example in a minute. But it's just to give you a second line of defense of your code before you deploy, because obviously you've got continuous integrations and that kind of stuff. So that's generally what tests are for, is to double check the work you've done, to give you that extra second layer of protection when you deploy to production or before you deploy to production, to make sure that the code does what you expected it to do. So let's get ahead and write one. So we want to test the specific functionality. So you've got feature tests and you've got unit tests. Unit tests are generally to test a single bit of code. So for example, like our create function, it's creating an event. So we want to test to make sure it creates an event. Now, what a feature test is say, for example, we have our front end and a user has the ability to create an event, enter the details, and then when that event creates, it's expected to return to this page. So what you write a feature test for is go, right, user, create event, did the event return to this screen with this data? Was the user receiving a status of 200? If not, if for example there was a server error, i.e. code error, and it returned error 500, then obviously your test will pick up that that should have got status 200 but got status of 500. So that's what feature test is, literally testing the user flow and what you expect a user should do, like through each step. Whereas, like I said, unit is testing a particular bit of code. I don't know, you create a method to do 1 + 1. You expect it to return 2, it returns 4. So it's just testing a single block. So let's create a test. So we do PHP artisan make test, and we're going to go. Let's do. Should we do controllers? Don't know how we should do this. Yeah, let's just do events. Yeah, events / create. I mean, we could create a test to test everything. Yeah, let's go ahead and instead let's do models, and then we do event. So we're going to test a model for create, update, etc. And then we want to do a unit. Great. So we created our test. Let's go in our test folder. And we've got our models. And then we've got our event. Now, there's two ways you can name methods. So you can prefix it with the test, or I think off the top of my head, you can actually do is it test, and that will then pick up that it is a test. If you don't prefix it, the test won't be run. So, okay, what do we need to test this? Well, we need an array. So there's two ways you can set up data. Well, actually, there's a few ways. We can set up data manually. So say, for example, we know it expects an array. So we could go name, hello world, for example. Or what we could do is we could remove it from within the method. And there is a method called setup. And what that does is that will take its parent setup method. And then what you can use this for is, FYI, you have to keep this parent set up because otherwise it won't boot the Laravel application stuff and you won't have access to the Laravel like magic, basically. We could then paste our array in here. So again, you could do one or two things. We could go this array is equal array. And then what you do, you just initialize that. And then inside of here, we'd have access to the array, for example. So that's one way you can create that. The other way is you could use seeders. So just like we did with our user seeder, whereby we've got our user seeder here, we could seed a test database with that data, and then we can use it. Or the other way you can do it is you've got factories. So factories is a way to randomly generate information. So for example, as a default example in Laravel is the user class. The user class will create a user, and you can specify how many users you want to create. You could create 100 or 10 or 5. So again, that's another way. For this instance, at the moment, I don't see the need to create any like seeders or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to leave the setup as is. So we're going to remove it. And for the time being, we're literally just going to do event data is equal to this. Let's remove that. Now let's structure this in a little bit of a cleaner way. Right. So we know name. So we're just going to say, okay, we're going to have a test event. Right. We know it should expect a URL, and it should expect a end start date. End date time and start date time. So what we can do is we go. Let's go to a date. I can't remember what I named it now. Stream URL. Stream underscore URL. HTTP. Google.com. And then we've got a start underscore date time. And then what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to, we have data, yeah, we do. I'm going to nick one of these. Like that. I'm going to put that in a string. So we want that like that. That. Right, so we've now got our event date structure. So what we then can do is, because if we compare our repository, we know that that actually we should have a user ID in there too. So we need to put the user ID. So we go user underscore ID. That's what. Now this doesn't have to exist. It doesn't matter for the time being, anyway. I'm not sure if Laravel will fail because the user ID don't exist. So we might need to create a user. So actually we might need to do a bit of data seeding, but we'll see. Then what we want to do is we need to instantiate our repository. There's a couple of ways which we could do. So if we go back to our public functions, set up, and then what we can do is go this event repository is equal to, now I've got to remember off the top of my head, I think it's, oh man, can't remember off the top of my head, something, is it app make? App make, no, I might be wrong here. Could be wrong here. Instantiate repository test. Oh, I spelled instantiate wrong. Oh well, spelling's terrible. Depends whether or not they do it slightly different than the way I was thinking. What? Sorry, that's a cat. Can't quite remember off the top now. I'm sure it's at make or something like that. This is using mockery. Sorry, that's a cat again. Right, I know I've done this in a previous one, so let's go ahead and take a look. Sorry, bear with me. I genuinely can't remember. Oh, it is app make, and then you instantiate the interface. So if we go app backslash interfaces, and then what we will instantiate is our base interface. Base interface, I believe. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to grab this repository, and then we want grab the what do we want to do? No, actually, I think we need to grab. How do we set up the provider again? So we bind. Yeah, so actually, it's not the base. It's not the base one we want to instantiate. It is actually the event interface. This will allow us, because of our service provider, that will link the event interface to the event repository. So now, if we, for example, did all, and then we just temporarily dd this, we should actually get an emptier collection. Also, what we do need is, if you go in the docs and this will tell you how to do your migrations, which is date. Man, I can't remember. Database. There's you need to use this database. One page. Reset our database. There we go. Use refresh database. We put that in. Pull that. Okay. So we've imported that. So what that does is essentially resets the tables after each test. And the other thing we need to do before we run our test is our PHP unit. We're going to use SQLite, so we don't need to create another database, or it affects our existing database. So now if we do test, I believe that should. Did that run our test? Example, test, example, test. Don't think that did run our test. Example, feature and unit. Yeah, no, it didn't. Could be wrong. Let's do that. About the helper there. Oh, I know why that's not running. Sorry, it's because we didn't. You have to put test in the name. Let's rename that. Let's rerun that. Yep, so that failed. Why did that fail? Facade root has not been set. Interesting. Did I use the wrong? Facade app. No, it doesn't seem to like it. Okay, I'm not sure why that's not working. Is it because, let's test something. Let's import the test case. Let's try that. Yeah, there we go. So basically what happened there was, when using test case, you was using plain PHP unit, which meant it didn't have a lot of the Laravel stuff built in. Whereas test case has a lot of the Laravel like default stuff we can use, like app container, all that kind of stuff. So now, as you can see down the bottom here, we returned an empty collection. So now we know our repository is now working, and we go this event repository create. Now we're not getting any auto completion because I don't know why. PHP Storm doesn't, when you instantiate it like it through the container, it doesn't pick up the autocomplete. If someone knows why, then please do let me know, because it bugs me. We pass in our array, and then what I would expect this to return is, I actually think it's going to return an error because of this user ID. It's going to try and create a relationship for a user that doesn't exist. So we'll see. We return, we I'm going to expect to assert. Oh, dear me. Assert. We're going to assert that this instance of, and we're going to expect that this is going to return an app backslash models backslash event. Comma separate that. Get rid of that. So because in our repository we're set to return the event after it's created, what I would expect to see inside my return, or that method return, is the event. So we expect an instance of app models event object. So let's see. I'm pretty sure this is going to error because of the user. Oh, okay, it didn't. So if we go test event underscore created and returns underscore created event. Just, yeah, you can name your test whatever you want. Try and be as descriptive as possible. In terms of the length, doesn't matter. Let's try what I did before I forgot to rename it. So I'm pretty sure if we prefix it like that, yeah, there we go. So then if we go event create method returns the created event. Now, what we could do as well is to check whether or not a user got created. So what we could do is we can do one or two things. We can either create another test and test that our users was synchronized to the event, or inside of here we could do another assertion. So assert that account, and then we're going to go expected account to be 1, and then if actually we put this into a variable, we do event. Right, now we could do eager loading, but because we're not dealing with a lot of data, it's not going to matter. So if we do event users, we grab the first, and the ID. Sorry, if we actually just do users, we'd expect that to return a count of 1. So I think that will be okay. No, it failed. What did it fail? Okay, it's probably because I did count. This will do the count for us. Okay, so that's returning 0. Okay, so before we do our test, let's see what this is returning. Okay, so by the looks of it, it's not inserting our user. It's interesting. So I think that's because the user don't exist. I think that is the reason. So did we do this, and then we do user repository, and we do user interface. Paste that there, right? And then what we do is this user repository create. We pass in an array, which we know it expects a name. This is going to be user. Let's see if this is the reason. What else do we need? Email is bob@email.com. And then we do password. Do hash make. So hash make is to encrypt a password. You can also use bcrypt helper, I presume, inside of here. The password. I think that's all we need. Email verified. Don't really matter if verified, because we haven't got verification on. That should, and what we can do, we can leave it as 1 because we're only expecting 1. So let's do our test now. See if it gets inserted. Yeah, there we go. So it's because we didn't create a user. So when it tried to do the synchronization of relationship, it checked to see if the user ID existed. It didn't, so it didn't insert it. So now, what we can do is we can assert count that users should be 1, which it does. There you go. There's our test passed. So like I said, we can separate this as its own test, so we can check, okay, the count, check that the name equaled to that name. But in this instance, I think we can just chuck it into the same method when we're testing. Theoretically, that's probably wrong, the way what I just said, because we're describing this as that in our test, we're saying that the event created returns the created event. So we're saying, okay, it should return the event. Whereas we're also checking the user's count. So theoretically, that we're testing 2 things, but only describing 1. So we could do create event and returns users count 1, for example. So okay, now that's a test that we know is doing 2 things in 1 method. So I think actually we've covered quite a bit. I've hit the half-an-hour mark. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of insight into also testing. There's so much more to testing than just simply doing what I showed you. It's a good thing to learn and gain a lot of knowledge about, because it helps you as a developer to maintain a structure of your code. So if you're going to write a feature test or a feature in general, you could do it 1 or 2 ways. You write the feature, then you write the test, or do it in a TDD way, which is test driven development, which is you write the test, make it fail, then write the code to make it pass. So what you're doing is you're preempting your code before you've written it. So you don't write it, realize you made a mistake, have to change it, because you're preempting most of it in your test, and then you make each test pass as you create the code. So you're sure that what you're writing is going to work. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this. I'm going to try and get a bit more done off camera, and then try and discuss more as I go along. I didn't get as much done because I've been pretty busy, but I wanted to show you a few bits here and there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, sorry it's been so long since I did a video, just been super busy. But please keep liking and subscribing. It really, really does mean a lot to me, and your comments mean a lot to me. So keep the comments going. That's just going to push me to get even more stuff out to you guys, and it shows me that you're enjoying what I'm giving you. So yeah, like and subscribe, and the next video I'll be releasing will be the refactoring app of an application that was in production. I go ahead and watch the first video. I hope you like that one. That's, I think, is going to be really, really helpful to you, hopefully. So yeah, I'll see everyone later. Goodbye.